Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video I'm very excited to do because I'm going to be doing an eyeshadow palette makeup tag video. This video idea came from a collaboration between Samantha March and Alec Glines. I enjoyed watching their videos and I wanted to share my eyeshadow palettes with you. If you like makeup videos and eyeshadow palettes in particular, I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you do, and I invite you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that already. Without further ado, let's get into my eyeshadow palette makeup tag. I really enjoyed going through my collection and pick the palettes that would match into the categories or all these questions. So let's get into it. I hope you guys enjoy it too. So the question number one was, what is the newest palette in your collection? So the newest palette of my collection is the palette that just arrived yesterday. I loved it already. However, I haven't even touched it. I haven't even swatched it. This is the newest palette from Anastasia Beverly Hills called Rose Metals. This is the beautiful neutral palette. This is the outside packaging. I still have it right here and the mirror is still sealed. I love this color story, even though I can't speak for the quality yet. The full review on this palette with its look tutorials will definitely be here on my channel, so stay tuned. Let me know guys what your newest palette is in the comments below. Question number two is, what is the oldest palette in your collection? Yeah, I definitely have one, and it definitely gives me like a massive throwback to the times where I just started getting into makeup. I always loved makeup, but this palette was purchased when I really started getting into makeup, when I started wearing more makeup and experimenting with like more colors, like smoky eyes, things like that. So I purchased this Morphe palette, and this is a 35W, very neutral palette. We have some pops of colors right here, but very neutral mattes and shimmers. I've used a lot of it. There's just like significant dents going on here. For some time, this used to be my only palette that I would use on a daily basis. When I purchased this, I was quite afraid of color. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's almost been at least 8 years since I purchased this palette. At least. It's probably closer to 10. Then I think I just hold on to it because it just reminds me of a certain time in my life. But yeah. Here it is. Question number three is, what is the most expensive palette in your collection? You guys already seen it on my channel. And this is Natasha Denona Sunset palette. This is definitely a color story that you would expect from a palette that is called Sunset, right? Like all your warm neutrals and beautiful shimmers. It is definitely a very expensive palette. I did not pay a full price for this palette. I did get it on Natasha Denona like holiday sale. However, as we speak, this palette is on very large sale. I think it's like discounted up to 50% off. So if this story appeals to you, if you like to have something from Natasha Denona, this is a good time to purchase this palette. I enjoy her formula, and this is definitely my comfort zone. Still, I really love the warm neutral tones, especially now for fall season. Even for summer season, you will be able to create like beautiful bronzy warm looks out of this. Now that I've showed you the most expensive palette in my collection, let me show you the most affordable one. And this is a teeny mini from Essence. It's called Coral Me Maybe. Unfortunately, the print came off of the packaging. It's a 6-pan palette, all the coral shades here, really nice gradient. Even though this palette is only $3.99, I only have one of the palettes. I think there were more of them launched, like 5 or 6 of them launched with different color stories of this kind. There are 3 mattes here and then completely different shimmers that you can still differentiate your looks. However, the quality of the palette for this price is pretty impressive. I traveled with this palette quite a bit and I used it quite a bit in summer. Question number 5 is, what is your everyday eyeshadow palette? So this next item is an eyeshadow palette. However, it is also a face palette. So there's a little bit of cheat here. However, this is truly the palette that I use a lot on a daily basis. It does sit like front and center here on my vanity where I get ready. I've traveled with this palette many times, and this is truly my most used palette. And I'll tell you even more, when I got it, it was an instant like love from a first sight or from the first application. Or if this palette to disappear out of my life, I would repurchase it in a heartbeat. This is a Face Glam palette from Natasha Denona. Mine is beat, you guys. I will tell you right away. Mine is beat up and quite dirty. This palette was launched in 2 color variations and mine is in a light option. So this palette has a cream blush, highlighter, and these 5 eyeshadows. I use this palette so much. I think I'm going to be hitting a pan on the highlighter. This is the most beautiful highlighter to my opinion. This is like literally my go-to highlighter. If I have to be out of the door in like 5 minutes, throw something on my eyes, I go for this palette. Like just 2 seconds and I'm out of the door. These shades blend themselves. And this is literally effortless. So I love this so much. Question number 6, what is your most colorful palette in your eyeshadow palette collection? For this category, guys, I actually included 2 palettes to show you because I am generally a neutrals lover, like a huge neutrals lover. A lot of my palettes are neutrals. Some of them have like pops of color, tuned down jewel tones. However, I still do have quite a few colorful palettes, very colorful. I'm gonna show you a palette that I actually really enjoyed, and it's a considerably new addition to my collection. And this is a part 1 from my Kayla and Glam Light collaboration. Look how fun this packaging is with this glitter. So I'm going to show you, this is the color story. It is very bright. It is very colorful. Top portion of the palette is definitely a little bit more neutral, and then you get all this fun bright shades. On my Instagram, I definitely have inspirations for you for this palette. I've used a good amount of it in summer. I was very inspired by this palette. There are limited opportunities here how many looks you can create with this palette. The shimmers are absolutely stunning. This was my first Glam Light eyeshadow palette, and I think I want to try more from the brand for sure. And the other colorful palette that I could not mention, I think it would be unfair if I would not include this in this makeup tag video. This is my only palette of its kind in my eyeshadow palette collection. This is a Fade into Hue by ColourPop. This is your true rainbow eyeshadow palette. It does have some pressed glitters here. I've created some really fun looks with this palette. I do enjoy colorful looks at times. There's definitely a time and place for that. This could also be a really nice companion palette, which it is for me. Question number 7 is, what is the smallest palette in your collection? And I want to show you 2 because they are of the same kind. I just happen to have 2 of them. These are the palettes that I picked up not so long ago. They are by Hardy Candy. I should show them like this. These are their Moods Monochrome Shadow Quads. I picked up 2 color stories, Buzz and Burn. These are definitely the smallest palettes I own. However, these are the cute color stories. They're pretty neutral, both of them. However, I did want to try the formula. I haven't tried anything from Hardy Candy before. These ended up being really nice palettes on a budget. And now that I showed you the smallest palettes, let's take a look at my biggest palette in my collection. And this is a palette that started my journey into the makeup, where I started experimenting with colorful looks and like more dramatic looks. This is the times where I started getting into YouTube. It was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I picked up this palette from BH Cosmetics. This is the Ultimate Mattes eyeshadow palette that has 42 shades, and they're all mattes. I love this palette, you guys. I love this palette back then, and I still love it. This is a really nice BH Cosmetics formula. This palette literally has every single shade that you would possibly need, and they're all mattes. I've created some beautiful looks with this palette. They're all blendable, they're buildable, but it's definitely the biggest palette in my collection. It's literally bigger than my head. Question number 9, what is the palette with the best memory attached to it? This was pretty easy for me to answer. This is a Naked by Urban Decay. I think this is their original Naked palette, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. But this palette started it all. This color story probably is very boring nowadays. However, it still appeals to me. I'm a neutrals lover. I still reach for this palette here and there when I feel nostalgic. But let me share the memory with you. So this is the palette that was the first high-end palette that I've ever purchased full price. Not only I purchased it once, I purchased it twice. Initially when I purchased it, I used to take it to work with me. It would make me feel good just to carry this palette around because it was my first high-end palette, and I literally could not believe how much money I spent on an eyeshadow palette. Long story short, I took it to work. I used to carry it to work with me, and this palette was gone out of my bag. And it was interesting because this was right before Easter. This was a day before Easter when this palette disappeared out of my bag at work. We never knew who took it. I'm not the most religious person, but I'm still religious. And for some reason, I had a very heavy heart the way it happened right before Easter, that somebody just like stole it from me basically. I had to repurchase this, and this is my second one. It's still here. Question number 10 is, what is the palette that is not worth the hype? Okay, this was a hard one, you guys, because most of the palettes that I have in my collection, I like. Some of them I love, some of them I really love, and some of them I like, you know, to an extent. I really had to sit down and think about this one. I picked a palette, take it with a grain of salt. I don't want to say that it's not a nice palette, but I'll explain myself. I picked this Smokey Eyes Are Forever by Charlotte Tilbury. This is a holiday launch from 2021. I picked it up last year from Sephora VIP sale when this palette was launched. And this was my first Charlotte Tilbury palette. And this is still my first and the only one Charlotte Tilbury palette that I own. I really like the design of the packaging. It's really nice and slim and very like classy looking. So I really love how there was like a gradient from lightest to darkest. So everything appealed to me when I saw this palette. I was like, this is it. This is going to be my first Charlotte Tilbury palette, and this palette was like $75. To this date, I probably used this palette 2 or 3 times. And the only reason for that is because the mattes are very patchy on me. I definitely need to try it again and give it another shot, you know, but the shimmers are outstanding. Again, I know that a lot of people love Charlotte Tilbury eyeshadow formula, and I really think that her shimmers are fascinating. They're fabulous, they're unique, they just have amazing reflect to them. They're very thin formula, but super high shine or reflection to them. This is the only reason I even still have this palette, and I haven't given it away to somebody else because these shimmers are something else. Well, I can say I regret buying this palette, but if I would go back, I probably skipped on it. Question number 11, favorite palette from a favorite brand. Okay, this was a hard one because there was a tie. There was a really big tie right there. I have several favorite brands now and several favorite eyeshadow formulas that I really enjoy, that I enjoy using, that I reach for them all the time. However, it was still very difficult to select one, but I eliminated, and I chose this analog palette. It's a cutie palette by Nabla. This shade is a duochrome. That's why I try to move the palette this way so you can see it. It shifts from like coral to gold. It's absolutely stunning. Palette is basic, but there's nothing basic about it. I always say this, it's because this is truly a special palette. This palette would definitely be on my top 10 favorite palettes. Nabla eyeshadow formula is truly amazing. Some of these shades are cream to powder formulas. They're absolutely stunning. They're just such a pleasure to work with. It's just such an enjoyable process every time that I have to do the looks, and every time it just comes out stunning because these shimmers have like such a beautiful reflect to them. Look at these, you guys. Are you kidding me with these? How can you not like them? Question number 10 is your most used eyeshadow palette. I did not want to repeat myself and say that my most used palette as of right now is definitely Natasha Denona Glam Face palette. However, I wanted to give you like a second option. I wanted to talk about a different palette. This is a palette that I've used a lot and I've used it year round. This is a Sigma Ivy eyeshadow palette. This is your neutral palette. However, it can go a little bit grungy. Sometimes when I want a little bit variation from my browns neutrals, I do reach for this navy matte blue shade. I purchased this palette when these 9-pan palettes were launched, and I would never guess that I would like this palette as much as I did. I have really loved their different textures of shimmers here. They're like true shimmer shades right here. And then this shade right here and this shade right here, they're more of a toppers. They look so beautiful as like a smoky eye, but there's so much glimmer to them. They catch on the light so beautifully. This is a palette that could be used for your dinner dates, for your office days. There's just a good amount of versatility. Question number 13 is the palette that I use every single shade. And I chose a palette that is quite a recent purchase to me. However, I definitely use every single shadow. Initially, when I purchased it, I used it for the first 2 weeks straight, creating so many different looks because I really find this palette inspirational. And this is a Natasha Denona My Dream palette. This palette was just recently launched. I've done a very detailed video, a review on this palette and sharing looks, tutorials with you guys. This is definitely a palette that I feel is very special to me because this is my first mid-size palette from Natasha Denona, and I definitely see the hype. This is the palette that's definitely worth the hype, to my opinion. Considering the size of the palette, I think it's one of the most cohesive palettes that I own. Generally, this palette is quite neutral. However, it is stunning. Every single look that I created with this palette is just so beautiful. Quality is very consistent throughout the palette. I really enjoyed the difference in finishes on some of the shimmer shades. This palette right away moved in onto my vanity. Even for my look tutorials in the video, I used every single shade in this palette and I continue using them. I feel like it doesn't matter what you mix together, like which mattes and which shimmers, looks come out so beautiful every single time. You can just like blindly dip into a pans here and then you would still create a beautiful look. This is definitely a palette that I enjoy so much. And the last but not least, question number 14, an honorable mention eyeshadow palette. This was also a pretty easy one, you guys, because this is a palette that when I saw it on a preview, I think I fall in love with it like this on a picture. It's like you would go online dating and you would see somebody's picture and it's like, oh my God, I'm in love already. This was that type of moment for me with this palette. And this is a rose quartz from Huda Beauty. This is the palette that I truly fell in love with it as the minute I saw it. And then once I got to test it and create looks with it, I fell in love with it even more, like head over heels. To this date, it's still one of my favorite palettes. I've created so many gorgeous looks with this and every time it's literally truly gorgeous. There are no duds in this palette. The quality is very consistent throughout the palette. Like look at these reflective swatches. This pink shade is truly one of the most unique pinks in my collection. This is definitely one of my favorite palettes, one of the most unique color stories in my collection. Okay guys, this sums up my video. I hope you enjoyed it and found this entertaining. Let me know if you have any of this palette in your collection. And if you're also a creator and if you're thinking to do the same video or if you already have done one, let me know in the comments below. I would love to visit your channel and watch your video as well. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. And once again, I invite you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that already. Thanks so much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you in my next videos. Bye.